Welcome to The Point. I'm your host, Ana Kasparian, and the big news story of the week was Miley Cyrus's performance at the VMAs. And you know what? That shit was depressing. So as a result, we have a pretty heavy-hitting show for you guys today with some pretty heavy topics, with some real heavy hitters. We're going to talk about the militarization of our police force. We're going to talk about chemical weapons in Syria and what the United States should do about it. We're going to talk about the NSA spying on their spouses and their ex-lovers. And then, of course, a topic that I care about a lot, the lack of paid vacation time here in the United States. But before we get to all of that, I want to talk about how we're all being taxed unfairly. And no, I'm not talking about the wealthiest individuals paying a disproportionate amount of taxes. I'm talking about regressive taxation, and that's the topic for today's No Filter. Regressive taxation means that you take the need for revenue away from the wealthiest people and you transfer it onto the people who probably can't afford it as much. So a primary example of that would be parking in Los Angeles. Recently, a few of my friends came to visit me, and when they parked in the wrong spot, of course, they got a parking ticket. And parking tickets in Los Angeles are more expensive today than they ever have been. Former Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa actually increased the prices of parking violations because he knew that Los Angeles needed more revenue. Why does Los Angeles need more revenue? Well, back in 1978, something known as Prop 13 passed, and it's been very, very destructive to California as a whole, and it's been really, really destructive to Los Angeles specifically. Because of Prop 13, property taxes in California were capped to 1%. So we missed out on a ton of revenue as a result. In fact, if you look back at fiscal year 2009, we actually missed out on $528 billion in tax money, and that has hurt our public schools. It has hurt other social services that are supposed to help benefit the middle class and the working class. Now, a way to make up for that revenue is to create more parking violations, more citations, and have a police force that focuses primarily on giving out tickets for traffic violations as opposed to focus on violent crime in Los Angeles. So all of a sudden we see really, really expensive parking fines, people having to deal with really, really confusing signs. In fact, recently LA Weekly wrote this great article about how we are making more and more money off of parking violations than ever before. To give you some examples, in fiscal year 2007 to 2008, parking citations generated about $128 million. Fast forward to fiscal year 2011 to 2012, all of a sudden we're making $153 million. In that year, we actually issued 2.65 million tickets, and you also have to keep in mind that Los Angeles has a population of 4 million people. So this is not the right way to go if you're trying to generate revenue for a county. You shouldn't transfer the cost onto the middle class and the working class. You should focus on doing the taxation that makes sense. And what I mean by that is, don't cap property taxes at 1%, especially if there's clear evidence indicating that it's destructive to your county, it's destructive to the state as a whole. Also, make sure that the wealthiest individuals in the state aren't paying less in taxes than the middle class and the working class. We talk about wealth inequality a lot on the show, and obviously we see that the wealthiest people hoard their money, they don't use the money to create more jobs. It's been really, really bad for our economy. We've had case study after case study indicating that. And it's really time that we shift attention back to our public schools, to social services, and the programs that help give Americans opportunities to live better lives. I hate the idea that we're now penalizing Americans for the stupid legislation that's been proposed by the wealthiest people in this country. So I'm totally against the parking violations. It's a really, really big pet peeve of mine. I've definitely talked about it a lot on the show before, and we should focus our attention back to issues like Prop 13. I should also note that we need a 2/3 majority in order to reverse Prop 13 or to even increase taxes in California, and that's a problem as well. So what we need are real politicians that focus on real issues like this, so you and I don't have to deal with stupid parking tickets. All right, now that you guys have heard my rant, let's talk to our panel about the topics that we have prepared for today's show. Let's actually meet our panelists that I'm very, very excited about. Marcy Winograd is a teacher, activist, former congressional candidate, and the author of the young adult fiction novel Lola, Zola, and the Lemonade Crush.
There it is.
That looks really good. Can you give us a very quick...
Sure, it's about a young girl, 6th grader, who takes on the 1% with a lemonade stand and tries to support her family when they're laid off in massive layoffs. Sound familiar?
Very cool. Oh, God, I'm actually in the process of trying to write a book right now, and it is challenging. So very, very good job.
Thank you.
Mike Preisner is an Iraq War veteran, a political activist, and co-founder of March Forward, an organization of active duty members of the U.S. military and veterans that encourages and assists current active duty service personnel to resist deployment. That is pretty edgy. How do you do that?
Well, lately we've actually just been going to military bases that are slotted for deployment to Afghanistan in the next few months, cover the bases with thousands of leaflets with information about how you can actually exercise your right to not have to deploy to a war that we have no reason to be fighting.
Wow, very, very cool work. Jimmy Dore is an award-winning stand-up comic, radio host, podcaster, and the host of the Jimmy Dore Show, the flagship program on the hilarious and rapidly growing TYT Comedy YouTube channel. Jimmy, I want you to tell us a little bit more about your award because I think it's amazing.
Oh yes, I have our special on Comedy Central, which was chosen Best of the Year by God and iTunes, and also Top 5 DVDs of the Year by Punchline Magazine, so I'm very proud of that. Thanks for bringing that up. Who told you to say it?
I don't know, a little birdie told me.
Oh, okay,
but
well thanks.
I feel like I'm not accomplished enough sitting next to you guys. You guys are amazing. I'm really looking forward to having a conversation.
You're writing a book right now?
I'm working on it.
Tough, right?
It's tough to actually sit down and dedicate the time to do it. If I had unlimited time, of course I can like knock it out, but it's just difficult.
I'm trying to read a book right now, which is holy shit, it takes forever.
Right, right. All right, well, let's start off with our first segment, and it has to do with the militarization of our law enforcement. A real warrior on this issue is Radley Balco, and he talks about the issue in the next video. Let's take a look.
Explain how we've gotten to this point now in 2013 where the line is so blurred between military soldier and cop.
Yeah, so this is an important line that we've respected for a long time in this country, this idea that, you know, soldiers and police have very different missions, and it's dangerous to start to conflate the two in a free society. And what's happened over the last generation or so, it began with the drug war, is the Pentagon started giving away this military equipment to police agencies across the country, and we're talking, you know, tanks and armored personnel carriers, helicopters, you know, high-powered weapons, bayonets for some reason. Police agencies love bayonets. And so once they have this equipment, then they've started forming these SWAT teams. The increase in the number of SWAT teams across the country is really dramatic. In the early 80s, about 15% of towns of 25,000 or more people had a SWAT team. Today, it's well over 80%. And the total number of SWAT raids has gone from about 3,000 per year, actually from a few hundred per year in the 70s to a few thousand per year in the 80s to 50,000 SWAT raids per year in this country today.
So this really seems like a domino effect of the military-industrial complex, right? We have all of these weapons, we now use drones, and apparently Americans are okay with the US government using drones. And we're starting to see it shifting from the military to local law enforcement. And it's definitely problematic because we don't need a militarized law enforcement. We need to focus on crime and dealing with crime in a good, safe way that isn't going to be destructive to society. We don't need these crazy weapons in our law enforcement to actually enforce the law and to, you know, deal with crime. But I do want to give you guys some information on SWAT teams that I found really fascinating. So the number of SWAT teams in the US grew by 500 in 1975, or by 1975. By 1982, nearly 60% of American cities with 50,000 or more people had a SWAT team. By 1995, nearly 90% of cities with 50,000 or more people had one or more SWAT teams, which is incredible. And recently there was this story about an organic farm in Arlington, Texas that was raided because officials believed that there was marijuana being grown in the organic farm. When they showed up, first of all, there was no marijuana being grown, and they confiscated all of these random plants like berry plants and things like that. But the reaction to that situation was ridiculous. They had helicopters, they had a full-on raid of an organic farm, and even if they did have marijuana on that farm, I mean, I feel like that was just excessive action by law enforcement. Now, first question goes to Mike. Mike, I mean, do you feel like this level of militarization is something that Americans are aware of, or do you think that we're just kind of asleep at the wheel while this is all happening?
Well, I think people are aware that it's happening because we can see it. I mean, you see the armored personnel carriers. You see the cops decked out in more military gear than I saw special forces troops wearing in Iraq. So visually, it's striking, and visually, it's evident that this transition has happened and has been taking place over the past several decades. But what I think people don't really grasp is what the reasons for it are. I mean, since this became a thing, which was really the late 60s and early 70s, it's all been cloaked in this idea of law and order politics as being necessary to fight crime and things like that. But we're actually looking at how these things are being implemented. We see something very different. And I think a good example is with the Occupy movement. There, the militarization of the police was on full display with all of this riot gear, fancy equipment, and so forth. All we were being told is that this is to stop crime that's happening, there's drug use, things like that. But in reality, it was infringing on the rights of free speech and freedom of assembly for people. And so I think while we're seeing visually what's happening, we need to be paying attention to what the causes of it are.
Absolutely. And, you know, specifically with the Occupy movement, I saw the police force as being intimidating. It was a way of intimidating the activists, and obviously that was something that kind of destroyed the movement. I hate to say that, but Occupy no longer really exists in the way that they did originally. And another thing to keep in mind, at the time the Occupy protests really started firing up, some of the big banks made massive donations to the NYPD. Why do you think they did that? It's because they wanted them to intimidate some of the protesters. But Jimmy, what do you think the reaction will be in the future? Do you think Americans are actually going to do something to stop this? Or do you think Americans think that this is keeping us safe? This is actually decreasing crime?
Oh, Americans are always protecting their civil liberties. Don't you see it? No, you know, 80% of Americans now think that the government is not only listening to their phone calls and reading their emails, but they feel that they're also using that information for things that don't have to do with terrorism, and still half the people in this country are okay with it. So it turns out that the terrorists hate our freedom, and half the people in the country aren't big on it either. So I think that when people, you know, how many people have said this? Hey, if you don't have anything to hide, what are you afraid of the police for? Well, you know, the police aren't always the good guys, you know? They're sometimes the bad guys. When you see those SWAT teams all dressed up in more military gear than a guy in Iraq, I'm sure what's on his mind is protecting the Constitution. I'm sure that's what they're thinking about. And people say you can't generalize about the cops. And I try not to generalize the cops. Like when I look at Occupy Wall Street and in New York City and how they treated the people there, I guess all the good cops were on vacation those months. Where were all the good cops standing up for the citizens' right to petition their government? Where were those people? They were nowhere. They were macing women and pregnant women and old ladies, and they were harassing citizens. So this whole idea of you can't generalize about cops being bad or good, it's a culture. Or it's right. It's like they don't just pluck cops out of the random population randomly. Those are people who are thrill seekers who get a kick out of it. That's why they're cops. If I was a cop and I heard that there was a shooting somewhere, I'd get in my car and drive the other fucking way, which is why I'm not a cop. Right. Cops love that shit, which is why they are cops and they drive towards it, okay?
I'm going to disagree with you a little bit. I think that that is a bit of a generalization. There are people who want to be cops because they genuinely do want to keep the public safe. But I do also agree that, you know, there are numerous cases of excessive force that we cover on the Young Turks on a regular basis. And it's definitely discouraging to see those stories. And I definitely don't like when law enforcement push for legislation that would ban people from taping them or filming them as they're arresting people. I mean, look, you are a public servant, and as a result, you should be held accountable. Our tax dollars pay for your salary. Marcy, I want to talk about police in schools. Now, there's been a lot of criticism over putting law enforcement on campuses as an effort to keep children safe. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that the most important thing, what we have to keep in mind when we want to keep our kids safe, is to build a sense of community. And I don't think that's any different in the schools as out of the schools. We have all this militarization of our police force with hundreds of SWAT teams and very little accountability. We don't know who's got drones or what they're doing with these drones. what we need more of is really trust and building more of a co-construction of what's it going to look like to keep our communities safe. We should have workshops, we should have forums, we should have neighbors setting priorities. So I mean, I'm all for condemning the militarization of the police in the schools and out of the schools, but at the end of the day, I think we have to create something positive. What do we want to see?
Right.
Otherwise, we will just be buried in armor.
So we have this issue with mass shootings in the country, and of course we can get into a conversation about gun control, but one response that's been proposed is putting police officers or armed guards on campuses as an effort to protect the students if there is someone who goes crazy and starts shooting. Would you say that that is a decent argument to make, to have cops on campus to keep the children safe from these mass shooters?
Well, I think by and large, no. Mm-hmm. I do think there is a place for some police presence on campus, but more importantly, I think we need to create a community on the campus so that students can reach out to those who are in need. I mean, I've had students who are troubled. As an English teacher, I've read about this in their journals, and my first response would be to talk to the student, certainly if they're suicidal, if they're in harm's way, to follow up with that. And that's what we really need. We need people to be looking out for each other. We need mental health in our schools. During these budget cutting times, there's very little of that. Mm-hmm. And that's how we keep ourselves safe. I think these efforts to arm teachers, where was that, Chicago? I forget.
Yeah, there are a number of states that are considering it.
These people really are suffering from mental health issues.
Right. Yeah, I mean,
right?
we don't.
I mean, that's insane.
I mean, usually there are conservative Republicans that are proposing this legislation, and they're the same conservative Republicans that don't believe or don't trust our students or our teachers to teach in public schools. So it's funny that you trust them with guns, you don't trust them with education. So Mike, what is the eventual outcome of this police state that we're living in?
Well, the eventual, I mean, this is, look, it's no coincidence that, and even this thing you just mentioned about using school shootings to say that more police need to be militarized. This is another example of trying to mask it in fighting crime, fighting criminality, when I think there's actually a different purpose. And I even think the massive money that's invested in it and this kind of overflow of the military-industrial complex into law enforcement, it's not just all about money either. It's, I would say that it's more about social control. It's no coincidence that we have this massive militarization of the police and this massive expansion of this government spying apparatus at the NSA, which we'll talk about later, going up at the same time that living conditions for people in the United States are continuing to be pushed down. And if we look at when this militarization of the police really started, it was in the late 60s and the early 70s, when things like white supremacy, the government, the free market, the police, the military, all these things were being opposed in the most revolutionary way. And this is when there was this massive influx of cash into law enforcement. Even looking at SWAT teams, right? The first SWAT team right here in Los Angeles, 1968, the first mission of the SWAT team was to go to war against radicals, in particular the Black Panther Party. The first act the SWAT team in LA ever carried out was raiding the offices of the Black Panther Party. And I think we have to identify that this is happening because of the anticipation of the US government of increasing radical activism against these core institutions of our society. And so I think the result of it, getting back to your question, is that there's going to be a fight. There's going to be a protracted struggle between that tiny clique of billionaires and bankers that's sitting above our government and the power that they wish to exercise, and the masses of people who want a different course.
So do you feel that these actions by authorities are actually hindering political activism in the country, or do you feel that political activism is just not as, I guess, prevalent as it used to be? Because I'm noticing all of these civil liberties violations, which Jimmy Dore mentioned, and I'm noticing like so many of our rights are being violated, and the American public continues to sit back and allow it to happen. Do you feel that that's because they are already intimidated by the police state that we're living in, or do you think that it's just the way it is, and there's nothing that can be done to get Americans to stop being distracted by stories like Miley Cyrus?
Absolutely. I mean, the intent is to stop political activity.
Yeah.
I mean, if you go back to just look at the Occupy movement, I was one of the 7,000 people arrested during the Occupy Wall Street movement. That is a massive crushing of a political movement. When people all over the country, millions of people of all walks of life, were taking political action against very real concerns in our society. Massive unemployment, student debt, this idea of the American dream being there if you work hard, only to find that that's not the reality. People with very legitimate grievances, exercising their constitutional rights. And what did this apparatus do? There was spying on Occupy activists. The police forces used brutal violence to try to intimidate people from ever protesting again, arresting people unconstitutionally, me being one of them, and then subjecting them to inhumane and unconstitutional treatment while in prison to try to scare them from ever coming out into the streets again. And so we look back at the Occupy movement, despite its defects, that being a harbinger of what's to come, it was an example of showing what role the state plays when there are people trying to advocate for something better. They try to smash it with violence, scare people into coming out again, and that's the reason, by and large, that it doesn't exist today.
All right, well, Mike's getting me riled up right now. Jimmy, what do you think that the response should be?
Well, I just want to make one more point about it's weird that the cops don't live in the communities they police very often anymore, especially in Los Angeles, and so they see the people that they're supposed to be policing as the enemy instead of part of their community, which is a big problem. And so there's this us against them mentality that the cops also have, and
which is ironic, by the way, because most cops are not wealthy. I mean, they're part of the middle class.
But it's about power.
But it is about power. It's that power struggle, and so many studies have been done that show once you give an individual power, they typically will misuse it in some circumstances.
The two types of people most likely to become policemen are the people who were bullies and the people who were bullied. So it's the people who are the most sensitive to rules, so it can be a devil or a sinner. So they both come together, and those are the last people you want to have that kind of power, but they're the only kind of people who normally get that kind of power. And I think it's interesting that he mentioned that the banks made big donations to the NYPD Blue. Why is it when a bank gives you money to do shit they want, it's called a donation? But when I give a cop some money to do stuff I want, it's called a bribe.
Right. Yeah. That's a very, very fair point. So what would you like to see with our law enforcement? Would you like to see any type of weapons? I mean, there are some, there are authorities in other countries that don't have the type of weapons that our law enforcement has. Would you like to see them without the guns, without the drones, without the, in some cases, tanks?
Certainly, and I totally support efforts to ban drones, both in our communities and overseas, where we're killing people indiscriminately with our drones. I certainly support efforts to ban tanks and grenades, which some of our police officers have.
Which is insane.
Right.
Like, but the thought of a police officer throwing a grenade at you if you're growing marijuana, I mean, it's not that far-fetched. It really isn't.
But again, I don't see this as necessarily on the shoulders of the police. This is systemic. This is institutionalized, where our Defense Department is selling, War Department is selling surplus weaponry or giving surplus weaponry to police outfits that are doing what they want to do. So it really, I think it's from the top down. And as citizens, I think we have to empower ourselves and say, you know what, we're going to do surveys of our local police departments. What do you have on hand?
Yeah.
How many SWAT teams do you have? When was the last time you raided a home? What was the purpose? I mean, there's a whole litany of questions that we could ask and should be asking of our local police.
Yeah, with most issues like this, you always have to follow the money, and we have weapons manufacturers in this country, which is why we continue to go to war, which is why we continue to militarize our law enforcement, and it's a real issue. I mean, it always goes back to money and politics. It always goes back to jobs in the country. A lot of these weapons manufacturers employ people, and if we don't create more weapons, then we're going to lose more jobs. So it's definitely a tricky issue, but there's no question that police officers have no role on campus. We shouldn't be giving cops drones or tanks or grenades. We really need to reconsider all of this and create common sense legislation to keep our streets safe, because we all want to keep our streets safe, but we don't want to live in a police state in an effort to do so. We got to take a quick break. When we come back, chemical weapons in Syria, what should Americans do about it? Welcome back to The Point. A really big news story obviously has to deal with chemical weapons in Syria, and by the time you watch this video, Obama has probably already launched punitive military intervention in the country. But is that the right way to go? ABC News has more.
The images, the evidence gathered in the attack have prompted this morning the U.S. Secretary of State to issue the strongest statement to date, John Kerry saying the U.S. has very little doubt that a chemical weapon was used by the Syrian regime last week, killing hundreds or as many as 1,000 Syrian civilians. In the region this morning, possible options for a response are being discussed. U.S. Navy destroyers and submarines are now positioned in the Mediterranean Sea, armed with cruise missiles, ready to carry out strikes inside Syria if the president orders them.
Now, cruise missile strikes are one way that the Obama administration wants to react to the situation in Syria. I disagree with that, and I'm very curious to see what the panel thinks. Marcy, I want to start off with you. I mean, is the United States genuinely concerned about the chemical weapons used in Syria, or is there something else at play here?
Well, one has to wonder, right? Because certainly we had no problem selling a lot of chemical weapons to Saddam Hussein, and we don't see any calls on the part of our Secretary of State, John Kerry, on the part of our President, for a prosecution of the criminals in a legal sense. We don't hear any calls for the United States to join the International Criminal Court and prosecute, put these war criminals on trial. So we have to wonder, what is all of this about? Are we still subscribing to the doctrine under the Bush administration that we really want to build, expand our empire way beyond what we had initially planned into the Middle East? Is it about oil? What's it about? You know, because certainly we are not under direct threat, and there are other opportunities to address this problem, most importantly through diplomacy. We just canceled, our government just canceled a planned peace talk with Russia, right? So we know we're not pursuing any legal avenues, and in the United Nations Security Council, all we're talking about is trying to get others on board, not on board for possibly launching cruise missile attacks if we haven't already. So I think that it's very suspect, to answer your question.
It definitely is suspect, and what I also find suspect is, you know, Campaign Obama was very much against unilateral action. He believed that you have to advise with Congress. In this case, it's important to also advise with the UN, but it seems like Obama is ready to take some sort of action without having to deal with Congress, and I see that as problematic, especially when you look at polls that indicate that the U.S. Population is against intervention in Syria. Mike, what are your thoughts?
That's correct, actually. I mean, the latest Reuters poll showed that 9% of Americans oppose U.S. intervention, and 11% of Americans even oppose aiding the rebels and arming the rebels, as the U.S. has been doing for the past couple of years. So that kind of exposes this idea of the great democracy we live in, where the decision to go to war and launch, you know, these million-dollar missiles into a country to kill people that we don't know and whose culture we don't understand is made not by the people who are footing the bill, not by the people who will have to push the button or go be sent to die. It's being made by these, you know, fat cats who are sitting at the top, who have huge investments in these military-industrial complex corporations, generals who work in the Pentagon, who are going to five-star steakhouse dinners with these defense contractors and wheeling and dealing and signing these contracts, and these big banks and corporations who have a lot of interest in seeing an independent country like Syria, which does not follow the dictates of Wall Street and the big banks in New York and in Washington. There's a lot of interest, financial interest, in seeing that government fall. And so I think we really need to get to the real root cause of this. And your question for Marcy about, is the U.S. really concerned about chemical weapons? I mean, I went to Gaza in 2009 in the wake of Operation Cast Lead. I saw countless children who had their limbs melted off by white phosphorus, a chemical weapon that under international law is illegal to be used on civilians. The United States government did not care at all about the use of that weapon on civilians. And the greatest example of a chemical weapons attack that will have a lasting effect for millions of years is in Fallujah, Iraq, where the use of depleted uranium was used so heavily and so disgustingly that doctors have ordered all women in Fallujah to not even have children anymore because the amount of birth defects is so horrific and so prevalent. And so the U.S. government feigning concern over the use of something on civilians when they themselves are the biggest perpetrators and biggest funders of these kinds of atrocities.
So Obama said that chemical weapons would be his red line. And as soon as Bashar al-Assad passes that red line, he will react in some way. If he now does not react in some way, does that make him seem weak when it comes to national security, which, by the way, I should note, Syria does not pose a threat to the United States at all. So the fact that, you know, anyone would fearmonger and make that case is complete misinformation. But when it comes to the leader of the country, if he says that that is his red line and then he doesn't follow through, I mean, doesn't that make him look really, really bad?
Maybe to some people in his circles. I think for that, over 90% of people who oppose intervention, they'll be happy with the decision not to go to war. It's funny, I mean, we watched in that segment John Kerry saying there's no doubt that chemical weapons were used in Syria. You know what his evidence for that there is no doubt? You said common sense. That was his no doubt evidence that chemical weapons were used. I mean, it seems a little ridiculous. First of all, why would Assad use chemical weapons at the very moment that UN weapons inspectors had entered Syria to investigate chemical weapons? Kind of interesting timing there. And at the same time, why would Assad use chemical weapons at the time when they were decisively winning the war with conventional weapons? Why would they give this gift to the U.S. propaganda machine? So
are you denying that chemical weapons were used?
I think that this is a farce. I mean, I think that if they were reused, they were used by the rebels as a way to get foreign intervention. Look, the Assad government has no motivation whatsoever to use chemical weapons because they're winning the war through conventional military means. The rebels very much have a reason to create a lie about chemical weapons because they cannot accomplish their objectives without foreign military intervention. This has been happening over the past couple years with a massive flooding in of weapons and funds by the US government, by their partners in the Saudi monarchy and the Qatari monarchy. And so this war has been kept going. It's happening because of US intervention, but now we're headed towards what is going to be another all-out war by the US government.
I think Mike makes a very good point about who actually used these weapons. We don't know because there has not been a UN investigation. And we're not calling for one. Instead, we have our government calling for a military attack.
Well, it was good to see John Kerry get all pissed off and indignant like that. Did you see him? Like, he was really mad. He was like, he's upset about the indiscriminate killing, and he served in Vietnam, so if there's anybody who knows about indiscriminate killing, it would be John Kerry. And it was weird to see him say all that Assad and the Syrians are using chemical weapons with no proof. It's almost like he was swift-boating Assad. It was really weird to see him do that. And why can't those Syrian, only a depraved mind would use a chemical weapon. Why can't they just use good Christian depleted uranium tip bombs like we use? Or how about, why don't they use one of those bombs that don't kill women and children like the ones we dropped on Japan? I mean, all they have to do is try a little harder. Why don't they just Christian torture some of them in Guantanamo? I mean, what is wrong with these people? I'm so angry at those Syrians. They're so much worse than we are. This is such bullshit. To see John Kerry get indignant like that, I just want to throw a fucking pie in his face.
Yeah.
He is such a...
Well, you have to wonder what...
You just tortured your own goddamn soldier for a year and a half, John Kerry. Where's your outrage about that?
Absolutely.
Is this the same man who returned from Vietnam and denounced U.S. war crimes, who stood with winter soldiers in their testimony, or is this just a political operative?
And
Go ahead. Well, I just wanted to make a really quick point because right now the Obama administration is not calling for boots on the ground. They're saying that they'll do these the cruise missiles, and it's like a very weird half intervention, strange response to it. And if you look back at past situations where we did something similar, whether it was in Afghanistan or Iraq, it didn't work out too well for us. If anything, it caused more hostility toward the United States. These evil dictators took it out on their own civilians, and also there's no way to tell whether or not civilians are going to suffer as a result of these strikes, right? So it's not you don't know if you're even going to target the right people or if you're going to get the right people in these efforts.
For payback on them using chemical weapons, we're going to blow some people's fucking heads off, and that should even things out.
Right. Well, the bleeding is only on one side. No American lives to be lost, just these lives of people that we don't have to see. And so that's kind of the preferred method of warfare today. But I got to say, the last time I heard something about chemical weapons and evidence of chemical weapons, 5,000 of my brothers and sisters in uniform died, and over 1 million innocent Iraqis died. And so I think we need to look back, not too far in history, when we're hearing these claims of chemical weapons and justification for war. We don't need to look that far back to see what was one of the greatest atrocities of my lifetime. And we really have to look at the Iraq War as an example. And one of the things that came out was the Downing Street memo, which showed that when there is an objective, and the objective here is to overthrow the government in Syria and install a puppet regime that will follow the dictates of Washington and of Wall Street. The Downing Street memo showed that the US government and its allies in the UN, they fix intelligence around the objective. So they start with the objective, overthrowing the government, and then they create this narrative around it, fixing the intelligence to what they want to accomplish. That's what's happening here.
Dude, I need to have you on a panel with Glenn Greenwald. It would be like super exciting.
I'm not sure I'm that caliber, but I appreciate the compliment.
All right, well, you know what? We got to move on to something a little bit lighter. NSA spying, right? That's a super light topic. Now, as soon as Edward Snowden leaked information about the NSA spying on us, of course, there were a number of people that were actually supportive of it. Well, if you don't have anything to hide, you don't have to worry about anything. Well, it turns out that even if you are following the rules, the NSA is spying on you, and maybe not because of national security. Take a look at what Jessica Yellen had to say.
The National Security Agency scandal just got a little weirder. According to reports, NSA officers admitted using the agency's eavesdropping powers to spy on their own romantic partners and spouses. Since those revelations, the hashtag NSA pickup lines created a storm on Twitter. Users are tweeting their own jokes and lines, and the most common NSA pickup lines on Twitter are actually song lyrics that should be very familiar, at least to some of us who are old enough to remember. Hundreds of users have been posting the lyrics to the Police song, Every Breath You Take.
So the NSA has responded to this. They said that they found those individuals that were, taking advantage of the access that they have, and they discipline them. However, I should note that the full extent of these violations are unknown at this point because they resorted to self-reporting. So basically, there were NSA agents that had to do lie detector tests, and as a result, they came clean because they knew that they weren't, they were abusing their power. So we don't know every single NSA agent that's using their power to spy on their lovers or whatever it is. But Jimmy, first question goes to you. I mean, isn't this a perfect example or a perfect rebuttal to what people say about how you have nothing to worry about if you're not doing anything wrong, it's not a big deal? Well, it turns out, like, if your husband or your boyfriend or your girlfriend is working for the NSA, they're checking your emails to see if there's a little cheating going on the side.
First of all, I'm shocked that that is happening. I would think that all those millions of people who work for the NSA were perfect.
Yeah.
Also, again, it's exactly your point. People always say, well, I don't care if someone taps my phone. I'm not doing anything illegal. Well, I don't care about your phone, moron. I care about his phone. The guy who's actually standing up to power and doing something about it. So I don't want them tapping his phone and then planting something or putting some porn on his computer that there shouldn't be there. And then they go, oh, the guy's a kiddie porn. And then he's all, we found it out of that. That's the easiest thing to do, is plant that on someone's computer now, because they can do so.
That is so, I didn't even think about that.
Of
That's
course
totally
they
true
do. Of
really
course
scary.
they do.
Yeah.
And see, we covered you. But the horrible thing is that we're okay with it, right?
Yeah.
We found out 3 weeks ago now. Reuters reported that the NSA is listening in on our conversations, and when they find something illegal that doesn't have to do with terrorism, they're supposed to discard it. Well, they're not. They're taking it and they're giving it to the DEA, and then the DEA is then disseminating it to local law enforcement, and then they're also telling them how to cover up where they got the information from and to fix new info to show that they got new facts. So my point being is the worst thing that we were worried about is actually happening. It's been reported by Reuters, and it seems like almost no one's talking about it. I saw Bob Schieffer go on his show the other day and pretend like that information isn't out there. He keeps repeating that false narrative that they're not listening in on your phone, it's just metadata. They are listening in, they are reading, and they are taking that information, and they are using it to prosecute you criminally.
Yeah, I think
stuff.
what you said about standing up to power, those who stand up to power are under threat, is probably the most important thing for us to keep in mind, because I also have heard a lot of people say, well, I'm not doing anything wrong. What's the problem? We need to keep our country safe. And my response to that is, what is safe about shredding the Constitution and your freedoms?
And the thing that really bothers me about this is, if the majority of Americans actually believed in the democratic process and they believed in being politically active, then people would be up in arms, because people would want to stir the pot. They would want to question authority. But the vast majority of Americans are so distracted by the bullshit they watch on television every day that they don't care what's happening. They're not planning on being politically active. People like us are worried because we're doing a show right now where we are questioning authority, and if we stir the pot too much, we might get targeted. We might get our emails, spied on, or our phone calls listened to, and it's a really, really big issue. I think the only way to solve this problem is to get Americans to be politically active. And how the hell do we do that, Mike?
Well, you know, this idea of like, you know, if you're not doing anything wrong, you have nothing to worry about. But who's defining what doing something wrong is? During the Occupy movement, everyone who was politically active was doing something wrong. And then they were, all this weight of the state was put against them. And so that shows you that people, ordinary people, do have something to worry about with this. I'm saying, how do you get people to be politically active around these issues? I don't think there's something that you don't write a leaflet that has the perfect motivation for someone to read, say, oh yeah, now I understand your argument, I will be politically active. That happens on its own. The contradictions in the society we live in force people into political motion, just like the Occupy movement, and just like movements before that. I mean, the immigrant rights movement and so forth. That's when conditions become bad, and then there's just some spark, some breaking point, where there's some elevation in consciousness, and all of a sudden millions of people are moved into the streets. The spying apparatus that exists today, the militarization of the police, doesn't exist now because in this moment people are rising up in the masses. It's because the US government knows that that potential exists, because jobs are going to continue to go down the tubes. Vacation days are going to be eliminated more and more. Living standards for people are going to continue to decrease, while the richest, 0.1% of society will continue to get fatter and fatter and fatter off of our backs. And so we don't have to do anything to get people to be politically active. That will happen on its own. We just have to be prepared for when that moment happens, and with that clarity and with that organizational apparatus, so we can be the most effective when those moments come.
I do want to say one thing, though. I do think that there is something that we can do, and that is within our educational institutions, is to encourage more critical thinking, starting in kindergarten. You can't really start too early with this. Instead, what we have a society where there is an attempt to depoliticize everybody, and the biggest distraction of all is probably the cell phone. Consumerism is the opiate of the people these days. When I ran for office, and I challenged Jane Harman as a peace candidate, I remember I was threatened with arrest for wearing a political T-shirt in a public park. I was told I could not have a forum at a public library in Los Angeles. This is, if anything, an effort to depoliticize and discourage any kind of critical thinking. So I think we have to take the reins back and also really encourage our students from a very early age to question authority.
And we're also victims of irresponsible media. I mean, we have a system of checks and balances, and I think, even though it's not in the Constitution, obviously, I think that the media should be part of that system of checks and balances. We should be questioning authority in our media. We should be focusing on stories that we're talking about at this very moment. But instead, you have, CNN, and you have people like Erin Burnett making fun of Occupy protesters because they don't know what their mission is. They knew what their mission was. Erin Burnett chose to make it seem as if their movement was not legitimate, that had no merit. And that's a real problem. I think education and critical thinking is definitely one part of it, and also having a media that holds politicians accountable is also a huge piece of that puzzle.
Well, the problem with the media, in fact, it is one of the 3 occupations, journalists, that's mentioned in the Constitution. So that's why it is so important to our democracy, and they have been falling down. The problem is that the people who Erin Burnett is supposed to be investigating and exposing, she's owned by, and David Gregory and Brian Williams, owned by General Electric. Hey, Brian Williams, how many checks do you have to take from a defense contractor before you stop calling yourself a journalist?
Yeah.
I guess endless is the answer to that question, okay? Right. So you're right. That is, I think almost all the problems, that media is supposed to fix them. They're supposed to expose them. They're doing the opposite.
Well, not only are some of them afraid because their paycheck is issued by somebody who is doing exactly what they should be investigating, but I think there is this fear now among journalists.
Fear,
real fear.
Retaliation.
Of raids, of seizure of their records, of imprisonment.
And lack
Glenn
of access.
Greenwald blowing this, exposing what's going on with the NSA. David Gregory is asking him questions about insinuating that he should go to prison.
He should go to prison for journalism.
I think fear is very real.
It is real, and I should note, and I'm sorry we're running out of time, I should note that the fear of losing access is also a huge problem in the media. They want to get the interviews with these top officials, they want to get the ratings, but what good are the interviews if you're not going to ask the hard questions? We got to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the lack of paid vacation in the United States, and then finally, my Hottie or Naughty segment. Welcome back to The Point. A lot of countries, including European countries and Australia and New Zealand, really like to prioritize paid time off. But here in the United States, it doesn't seem to be much of a priority. Sam Cedar has more on this story.
The United States lags all other rich countries in the world for guaranteed paid vacation or holidays. The United States is the only advanced economy. The United States is the only advanced economy in the world that does not guarantee its workers paid vacation. European countries establish legal rights to at least 20 days of paid vacation per year.
Goddamn right.
With legal requirements of 25 and even 30 or more days in some countries. The gap between paid time off in the United States and the rest of the world is even larger if we include legally mandated paid holidays, where the United States offers none. But most of the rest of the world's rich countries offer at least 6 paid holidays per year.
Now, study after study indicates that in order to be more productive as an employee, you need rest, you need relaxation, you need to unplug. But we don't seem to prioritize that here in the States. In fact, we work harder than any other country. We work longer hours. Obviously, we don't have as much paid vacation. And as a result, we actually miss out on a lot of productivity. I should give you guys some numbers that just really blew my mind. In the absence of government standards, almost 1 in 4 Americans have no paid vacation, that's about 23%, and no paid holidays, another 23%. And the average worker in the private sector only receives 10 days of paid vacation per year. Now compare that to the 20 days that you get in Europe or Australia or New Zealand. I mean, it's a real issue, and it actually doesn't help us when it comes to being more productive in the workplace. So, first question goes to Marcy. Why is it that we, first of all, don't prioritize paid vacation? And if we do have paid vacation, it turns out the majority of Americans don't even take advantage of it.
Well, I think we do have paid vacation for those in the 1%, you know. They can take off and go to the Caribbean when they want. What I think we need to do on this topic is we need to really abandon our gross domestic product as a measurement of economic strength in this country and power. Instead of looking at, gee, what are we producing, and counting that as economic strength, regardless of whether we're producing prisons or cancer, we need to look at quality of life in this country. The UN has proposed an alternative index called the Human Development Index, which also would consider longevity and adult literacy, things like that. No, we don't care about that. So I say, look, if we want to strengthen family bonds, and here's a suggestion for the Christian right, if we want to strengthen family bonds, we should calculate mandated vacation time in our gross domestic product, and let's call it something else, and let's be real, because people are working themselves to the bone, certainly those at fast food restaurants who are going on strike. Great job. And those at the top, they get their paid vacation.
So, Mike, wouldn't you make the argument that, these massive corporations that employ these people that are barely getting by would really miss out on really important revenue if they were to waste their money on paying people that don't come into work?
Right. I mean, the big captains of industry, the fat cat bosses, they don't really care if their workers get burnt out or end up depressed, and all of these issues associated with not having any time to yourself outside of the daily drudgery of working 1, 2, or 3 jobs, because there's 20 to 40 million people in the United States who need jobs, who will line up for that job once there's a vacancy there. And so this is what it's about. It's about big capitalists competing with each other and competing on a global scale as well. And so the more that they can deny people vacation days, the more that they can deny people health benefits, the more they can deny people rights on the job, this actually helps their profitability. And that's the reason that we are in this situation today. And the reason that it's different here than in Europe isn't because the big bosses in Europe are just more sympathetic to their workers. It's just that the labor unions are much stronger in those countries. I mean, vacation days or the 8-hour day or the weekend, I mean, these were things that were fought for, militantly fought for. People were killed, people were assassinated, people went to jail for a very long period of time in order to win these rights. And so taking them away is this fight back and forth in this class war between those who have everything and those who have to work to survive.
Jimmy, wouldn't you say that this is an example that goes against libertarian fiscal policy? Because libertarians are totally against legislation that would make employers give you paid time off. But the libertarian argument would be, well, you know, you get rid of all of the regulations and then ta-da, all of these companies are just going to do the right thing because they're going to care about workers. And if they don't care about their workers, well, these employees will just go find work somewhere else.
Well, libertarians are also against public roads in the post office, and I also think that libertarian is just something, or a conservative calls himself when he wants to get laid. So, so that's enough of that. But you know, this whole thing about vacation days, and you know, I'll talk about this during my stand-up act, and I'll tell people, you know, people in Europe get 4 to 6 weeks off, just guaranteed, even if you're a waitress, no matter what you do. People are like, what? How come we never hear about that? That's because the guy who doesn't want you to know about it owns the media. He doesn't want you to know about that stuff. He doesn't want you. And David Brooks, right, the famed New York columnist, did a column recently about why the 1% make more money. It's because they work harder, he said. They're willing to take conference calls during their kids' ballet class. It's literally that was right out of his column. So you talk about, I don't know, being out of touch, and but he's considered, he's respected, he's on every Sunday show, he's on NPR every week, he's the, anyway, and that's what's wrong. NPR is also what's wrong with our country.
I hate that argument that David Brooks made. Like, if hard work led to economic success, then Mexicans would be the wealthiest people in this country.
Right.
I mean, they do back-breaking labor day in and day out. They work so hard, and obviously a lot of them are not part of the 1%. So, you know,
I mean, if you follow one of those guys after they're done cutting your lawn, they go right to Bel Air. I don't know if you've noticed that.
I didn't notice that, you know, good argument. But I remember, you know, I went on a trip to Europe right after college, and I remember I had to take a considerable amount of time off of work. I did not get paid for it, but I wanted to experience what it would be like to be in a different country or a different continent for a month. And while I was there, there were a number of Australians on this tour group with us, and they were talking about all the different places. We're all in the same age group, by the way, all of the different places that they went to throughout their lives. And I was so jealous because a lot of them actually did have jobs, and they were getting paid to be on vacation. And it was such an interesting experience because in order to be a well-rounded person, you do need to take that time off and experience other cultures. It just makes you a better person. But instead, we live in this country where we're told day in and day out that we're in the best country ever. Okay, we have, you know, we're living in the land of the free, and then you kind of delve into the details and you realize, no, we're not really in the land of the free. We can't even take a little bit of time off work and get paid for it.
So what do we do? So how do we push back against this? I mean, I don't mean to be cynical or pessimistic, but it seems like a one-way train. It's not going the other way. I mean, they're saying, hey, jobs are coming back. Yes, shitty jobs are coming back. Low-paying jobs are coming back. So we don't have an idea of that, you know, somebody should be able to work 40 hours and live a good life. That used to be the social contract. FDR said, if you're willing to work, we'll give you you'll have a chicken in every pot and a car in every garage. If you're willing to work 40 hours, well, that's no longer the social contract. Is not the
case
work 40
anymore.
hours, work another 40. And you don't have health care, it's your fault. You don't deserve it because you didn't work hard enough.
I really think that Mike hit the nail on the head. I mean, there's been this assault on unions for the past few decades, and the only way to make sure that workers have rights is to start supporting unions again. I mean, the SEIU, I mean, can they get a little love? I mean, their popularity has decreased significantly, and they've done great work. I mean, they're looking out for us. So don't allow conservative Republicans to, you know, use their propaganda to change your mind on the importance of unions. It's the only way that we will have protections in the workplace.
And as a teacher, I have to second that, because if you look at the state of California, some of the most powerful unions are the teachers' unions. And with efforts to privatize the schools, to create charters, to create magnets, to lay off everybody, fire everybody, bring in, you know, cheaper labor, the real agenda is to bust the unions, bust the teachers' unions, and so I urge our audience, our listeners, to support us.
It's the fat cat teachers that are bankrupting us with your gold-plated pensions and health care benefits. When something happens to your heart, you get on to Cartier and get a stent put in, don't you? That's what it is. Those goddamn teachers taking all our money, but they're so sneaky, they still drive junky cars to throw us off.
All right, I'm going to let Jimmy have the last word on that, and we're going to end our show with our Hottie or Naughty segment. So let's go to Hottie or Naughty, where we will pick the hottest person of the week and the naughtiest person of the week. I have to say that the hottie of the week is Elon Musk and Tesla Motors. They are absolutely kicking ass. Recently, their stock increased to $167 a share. And the reason why I'm so excited about this is, of course, they have one model, and that one model is built in one factory, but it's an electric car. And it's something that Republicans did not want to fund at all. They thought that it would not be a success, and it turned out to be a great success. They're expected to sell about 200,000 Model S sedans this year alone. And I'm obviously in favor of it being an electric car. That's great. And they entered the $20 billion market. If anything, I'm just excited that Republicans were proven wrong in this case, and as a result, Tesla Motors, Elon Musk, hotties of the week. Now, the naughty of the week is Mika Brzezinski. As you guys know, Miley Cyrus did a pretty disastrous performance at the VMAs. I hate that so many people focused on it. I admit we even talked about it on the Young Turks. But Mika Brzezinski kind of went way overboard when it came to her commentary. Take a look.
I think that was really, really disturbing. That young lady who is 20 is obviously deeply troubled, deeply disturbed, clearly has confidence issues, probably an eating disorder, and I don't think anybody should have put her up on stage. That was disgusting.
I've been around the track a few times.
Yeah.
I'm an old guy, right?
I
got 2 older boys.
Yeah.
I remember.
They don't think that's attractive, Miley.
So anyway.
Nobody does, actually.
If I could finish what I'm going to say.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Well, the point you're going to make is exactly what I just said. That was not attractive. That was not fun. That was not funny. And that was really, really bad for anybody who's younger and impressionable. And she's really messed up. So I don't think they should have put her on stage.
So here's the problem.
They should be ashamed of themselves.
Jesus.
Boy, wow.
Just calm down. I think that it's super irresponsible to accuse someone of having an eating disorder just because you didn't like her raunchy performance at the VMAs. Calm down. You are the naughty of the week. All right, guys. Well, thank you for watching the show. I want to thank our panelists.
Thank you.
Marcy, please tell our audience more about your book, where they can get your book.
Oh, sure. Thank you so much. Yeah, the book is Lola Zola and the Lemonade Crush, and it's about an 11-year-old girl who tries to support her family after they're laid off, along with thousands of other workers. You can get it on Amazon.
All right, love it, love it. Mike Preisner, freaking kicking ass and taking names.
Thanks. Well, if you'd like to find out more about our work and helping soldiers, refuse to have their lives thrown away in a war we shouldn't be fighting, go to ourlivesourrights.org to learn more about that. But as an anti-war activist, of course, right now I'm most concerned with this new all-out war that the U.S. is going to be waging. We are going to be organizing demonstrations all across the country as this ramps up and as the attacks happen. Go to answercoalition.org to find a demonstration near you or to submit an event that you're organizing.
Awesome. Jimmy Dore?
Okay, yeah, as this war ramps up, we're going to be making fun of it over at TYT Comedy. And we just broke 200,000 subscribers, so check it out.
I freaking love you, Jimmy.
Thank you.
Just 200,000. Next week it'll be 500,000.
Probably.
No, but you know what? It is a super funny show. I was watching it the other day in bed on my iPad, and I was like, this is freaking good, man.
Oh, that's sweet of you to say.
And I'm a little biased because I work for TYT Network, but it's still really, really good. All right, well, I'm Ana Kasparian. You guys should know me by now. If you don't, you have a little bit of an issue. But you guys can check me out on the Young Turks Monday through Friday from 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And of course, we will be back next week with another episode of The Point. And I promise there'll be more heavy-hitting topics that you guys will love and enjoy. Have a great week.